12 o'clock on your Thursday morning. Welcome in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head and Mike Gillespie once again hanging out here on this Thursday. As again, Terry Ford out of town dealing with some family stuff this week, and we hope to have him back here in studio next week. But Mike, it's a great day for you to be in here because it is officially the month where we can say there's football taking place.
Yes. This is my normally one of my favorite times of the year, right? Like everybody's undefeated at this point. It's all just hype. Plenty of storylines, right? Because once the season starts, the storylines, they narrow a lot, right? But so many storylines coming into this year 4 under Shane Beamer. What does that look like? New quarterback. Retooled running back room. Like I'm excited, man. It's here, and they get on the field tomorrow. Fall camp starts practice number 1 tomorrow morning.
It does, and then it's 4 weeks until the first game against Old Dominion, officially 30 days away from kickoff today, so nice solid round number there. And the funny thing about camp is, like, there's the initial excitement of, like, okay, and today we're going to hear from players and coaches and all that kind of stuff and get some thoughts and ideas of what they, think about, first day of camp. And then it's like those couple of weeks, we get a little bit of information, and our guys like at Gamecock Central, they're going to be able to go out there, see a couple sessions every single day, but not a ton.
Yeah.
And it feels like those last couple of weeks just drag on forever because you're right there on the doorstep, but you have not quite gotten to that threshold yet until you get to the end of the month.
Yeah, we used to joke in the TV world that it was the best 20 minutes of stretching video that we'd shoot for practices.
And I feel like, you can speak to this, I feel like Beamer's a little more generous with what he allows y'all to see than compared to like what Muschamp did back in the day.
Yeah. And Spurrier back in the day, as far as I know, well, I got here in 2014, so things started to close a little bit.
Yeah.
Like the last couple years under Spurrier. But I had heard that the bulk of his time, he had open practices. I mean, the fans could go and watch practice. It was pretty open, which I love. But now, everything, if you can gain an advantage, wherever you can, you're going to take advantage of it. So, I understand the close practices and stuff. But Beamer's a little bit better. We get, at least we get some route running, that's cool. We could see the quarterbacks throwing, which, is something that obviously fans want to see, how Lenora Sellers is going to look, and the last couple of years we've gotten some pretty good stuff that we've been able to use. Under Muschamp, it was pretty bad, though. And
it's more along the lines, for the brief availability you guys get to see, is like seeing who's with who.
Yeah.
Right? We think this is the starting offense. Who's on the offensive line? Who's taking reps at receiver? I don't think you're necessarily looking at that from a skill standpoint, but hey, Vershawn Lee's at center. Kason Tenry's at right tackle, Tree Babalade's at guard or whatever it may be, giving a sense of what this is looking like as far as trying to figure out who's going to be where when the season starts.
Yeah, and you have to understand too, that's not a whole lot changes, in my opinion, from now to kickoff, right? You only have 30 days, so more often than not, when you see the ones come out on day one, that's probably, those are probably the ones that are going to suit up, against Old Dominion in 30 days, barring some injuries and stuff. But you get a good sense for sure.
There's inevitably always going to be that one name in camp as well that you hear about, coaches kind of talk about a little bit, and you're like, man, this guy's going to be doing big things when the season gets here, and then the season gets here, and you never really hear his name called. You're like, well, what was that all about?
Completely overhyped.
Right. Yeah. But there's always that one guy, right? It seems that way.
Right, yeah. And I can't tell sometimes, I'm not saying that this staff does it, but I'm sure coaches, do this where they'll kind of play tricks with the media, right? They'll put it out there, hey, this receiver is going to do big things this year for us, as kind of maybe a distraction for their opponents coming up. Oh, we got to look out for this guy too now, just complete mind games. But yeah, you're right. And then, the season comes and it's wow, that kid had 3 catches all season.
I know. Wow, we thought he was going to be on the Heisman list or something like that.
Yeah.
But you do have to kind of read between the lines, kind of figure out what the true story of camp is going to be. Our guy Chris Clark, who just dipped out at the end of the 11 o'clock hour, put up a list yesterday on Gamecock Central of 10 preseason questions, particularly as it relates to the offense. I imagine he'll have one up later today in regards to defense. And one of his questions is, can third down be better?
Sure.
And I took kind of a deep dive into the numbers on third downs for South Carolina, not only in Beamer's era, but since I could find the numbers going all the way back to 2009.
Yeah.
Carolina's historically not good on third downs. The last time they've been better than 40% was 2018.
Is this third down offense conversion?
Yes, third down offensive conversions,
okay.
yes. 34% last season,
sure.
which was among the worst in the SEC, and you certainly felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
The last time they were better than 40% was all the way back in 2018. It's just something about, no matter who the coordinator is, because that was multiple coordinators ago, this team, this program just can't get it clicking on third downs in the past almost decade now.
Yeah, and you know, the stereotypical answer is always, we got to be better on first and second down, right? Like, to put yourself in a manageable third down situation. But there's a lot that goes into that as well. And when you start breaking down the numbers from last year, you know, you're talking, it wasn't like, the numbers aren't terrible when you're talking about attempts per game, right?
Sure.
USC didn't exactly find themselves in a ton of, you know, third down situations. I think they averaged like 13 maybe per game, which you know, is pretty far down there on the stat list from last year. But you know, the problem was they're 118th in the country last year in third down conversion percentage, right? Which is terrible. Then you take a little bit more of a deep dive and you see that, okay, yeah, on first down, they're passing the ball. When it comes to passing versus running, they're passing the ball at a 2-to-1 ratio as opposed to running, right? So they're passing the ball twice as many times as they're running the ball on first down. Now, go a little bit deeper than that, and you say, well, of course, because they don't have any running backs, right? Like last year, they entered the season really without a true running back. The running back room is totally retooled this year, right? But in my opinion, you kind of gave away the farm last year, because it's like, if you're a defense and you know that this team is going to pass the ball at a 2-to-1 ratio to run on first downs, like, you're going to play a little softer. And I think that had a lot to do with it. So, you know, being able to get some new running backs, some good running backs in that room this year, I think changes that a lot, because now all of a sudden you're not behind the sticks after first down.
Yeah. I ran the numbers on just against SEC opponents, because numbers can get skewed when you're taking on the Woffords and the Furmans and teams like that, like they did a season ago. But just purely against SEC opponents, South Carolina's average third down yardage was 3rd and 8. So that is a 2-yard run on first down, an incomplete pass on second down, and boom, you're in 3rd and long all of a sudden. And that was kind of the story of the season last year. But at the same time, like you said, and people were very critical of Dow Loggains' play calling at times last year, but when one element of your offense is not there and is not reliable enough, you're kind of handcuffed. And he kind of spoke on that to a degree when we heard from him last week without really throwing anybody under the bus. He's like, look, we couldn't run the ball. It was an offensive line thing. We didn't have the depth we needed at running back. It just wasn't the right combination to where, guess what? If I'm a defense and I know you're going to throw the ball, I probably got a pretty good shot at defending that. Now, Spencer Rattler's talent certainly superseded some of that disadvantage.
And Xavier Legette.
Having the monster season that he did certainly helped out as well. If you had a C+ quarterback and a C+ wide receiver filling those roles instead, last season could be even more of a disaster.
Right.
But you had talented guys that were able to supplement for that a little bit. But, going into this year, if the running back room is what we think it's going to be, the offensive line is healthy and, as good as we think it's going to be, I can only imagine how much better all this is supposed to get.
Yeah, I mean, depth is a concern on the offensive line this year. We saw it in the Garnet and Black Spring game, right? Like, the twos didn't look great. Whether that's just it's early, right? Like, who knows? Maybe that gets ironed out. There's got to be some concern there. But the starters on the offensive line, this is shaping up to be a very solid line this year with a lot of experience. I think having running backs who are able to find holes, who are patient with the football, I think is going to help a lot too. You think about this, and no offense to, Newberry. I mean, I love Newberry. I covered Newberry for 10 years at Wallow, but, you look at last year, and the best running back just so happened to be a D2 transfer, right? It's like, I mean, what? That should not happen, right? And at an SEC school, I know it happens occasionally, but it shouldn't really happen at an SEC school. Now you've got a true number one running back, and you've got a lot of depth there too. The kid Jawaren Howell that they brought in from SC State, covered him as well, and that kid reminds me a lot of Mario Anderson too. Really patient, right? Like super fast, breakaway speed, man. And so it seems to me that they've lined themselves up well in that room.
And I'm very interested to see what Jawaren Howell is going to do, but I think he's in a more desirable situation as opposed to what Mario Anderson was a year ago, and we kind of thought Dakereon Joyner was going to be the guy at running back last year. Quickly figured out that wasn't the case. So then it's like, well, your only other option is this guy from D2, and we didn't know how he was going to translate to the SEC. But Jawaren Howell coming in maybe is your third option at running back. That's perfect for a guy like that who, again, we don't know if he's going to be able to make the transition up to SEC. And if he doesn't, that's okay. You've got other options around him as opposed to your entire running back room relying on this guy being able to make it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and he was the guy last year for SC State, covering that team last year. I mean, there were times, much like Mario Anderson last year with USC, there were times that, the play kind of breaks down and, you think, it's going to be like a 2-yard loss, and all of a sudden the guy's still on his feet, and he finds a hole, and he's so fast that it's like no one can catch up with him. I think people are going to be really impressed with what they see out of Jawaren Howell. It just seems like a very deep room this year. I think that was, to be honest with you, I think those portal additions in the running back room were the best of the offseason for USC. I thought, obviously, it was, pretty glaring that they needed to retool that running back room, and I give them an A because I think that totally changes your game plan now moving into 2024, and it helps with those numbers that we're talking about on third down because, like we said, all of a sudden, on first down, you don't feel like, if you're Dow Loggins, you don't feel like you have to, rely on Spencer's arm, or Lenoris's arm this year, but last year relying on Spencer's arm was sort of the key on first down. You don't feel like you have to rely on the passing game this year on first and second down. And, it's interesting. I was reading this morning the study that Michigan did, and, this might be pretty obvious, but, a successful play, right, is they term a successful play where you get 40% of the yards needed on first down, right? Yeah. So 4 yards, right?
Keeps you at the sticks.
Right. So, not 3. I would say 3, or really any, against a good defense, as long as it's not 1. I think it's positive because if you get to 2nd and 8, at least there's still some options there. You can pass, or you can still run the ball and make it, a 3rd and 4. But then, yards needed on second down, right? You get a little bit more, and then all of the yards, obviously, on 3rd and 4th down. That's successful.
Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, if you're getting 3.5 yards play, you're staying ahead of the sticks and should never, ever have to punt or kick a field goal at that point in time, right? But unfortunately, football is not as perfect of a science as that kind of equation might suggest. Plenty more conversation about South Carolina and fall camp, particularly when we can talk about Lenoir Sellers coming up in a little bit. But Bill Connelly put out his best games of 2024 on ESPN yesterday, and the ones in the SEC particularly interesting. We'll dive into those coming up next. It is the Halftime Show. He's Mike Gillespie. I'm Tyler Head on your Thursday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Ed, Mike Gillespie along with you on your Thursday. Reminder once again, the greatest sports moments in Gamecock history since the year 2000, live on our Twitter page at 1075 The Game. Vote for the final poll this week. Going to take the 4 winners next week, have another poll, and talk about the ultimate winner on Monday, August 12th, sponsored by our friends at Columbia Craft on 520 Green Street down the Vista. Tough options today, by the way.
Yeah.
Couple national championships. The football win against Clemson in 22. DJ Swearinger's hit against Clemson in 2012.
Yeah.
That's and when I last looked, they were all kind of neck and neck. So tough options.
The original options, because I didn't see those, was that Missouri game, that rain delay in 2018? 2018?
Let me go back. We've had this running all week long.
So that was one of the coolest games I've ever covered.
Was that the Scarnecchia game?
Yes, it was. Michael Scarnecchia playing for Jake Bentley. He goes off. Carolina wins by a field goal against Missouri. One of the best games I've ever covered. I mean, like, you had probably 5,000 people at Williams-Brice by the end of that game, and it was the loudest 5,000 I think I've ever heard in my life.
It's one of those things when you're at any sporting event with bad weather, if you're there, you've already gotten as wet as you're going to get.
Yeah.
You're already as cold as you're going to get.
Yeah.
It's not really going to get that much worse. So you just got to kind of lean into it, embrace it.
For sure.
And, it's a fun story to tell after the fact.
Oh, 100%.
As opposed to just being miserable in the moment.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of those games that it's just like, yeah, I got soaked. I had to replace my shoes the next day, but you know what? We won and it was worth it.
Yeah, well, it's funny too because there was like a 1% chance of rain that day, and our meteorologist John Farley is just the best. He sent me this screenshot during the game, and he's like, "You realize that the only place that it's raining right now in Columbia, in the Midlands, was over Williams-Brice Stadium."
So Terry J and I uncovered sometime last year that the 1% chance of rain is not like, hey, this is the chance. No, it's like 1% of the area is going to get rain. And that on that day, that 1% just happened to be Williams-Brice
It just happened to be right directly over the stadium. It was so bad. We actually... we didn't bring any God, this is how stupid I was back then. We didn't bring any rain gear for our cameras, right? Because it was just like, we didn't think about it, right? Like, why carry the extra bags, and our gear just got soaked. And it was bad. Like, we wound up taking the rest of the game, instead of shooting it ourselves, we just wound up taking it from network, because it was just, at one point, like, you couldn't even see. I didn't even know where the ball was. I was like, I'm just gonna go inside and watch this on TV for the rest of the day.
Try and dry out a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
But that game did not make the list this week because we had to narrow it down.
There were a lot of good moments.
I guess 16 total for each day. But today's options, you got a couple women's basketball national championships, as I mentioned, the win against Clemson, and football in 2022, and DJ Swearinger's hit in 2012. So again, go online, 27 The Game's Twitter, and vote on that.
Which national championships?
The 2017 and the 2022 against UConn. 2017's winning right now. I
was going to say, for me, it's got to be 2017 because that was obviously the first national title.
Sure.
Now, everybody said, here's the other thing. Everybody said that Carolina was going to lose to UConn in the national championship game. Then that's set, right, of course. And that night, obviously, Carolina wins that first game in the Final Four. Mississippi State beats UConn in that second semifinal. And then it's like, oh, well, here we go. And, Don hates, that rhetoric, right? Obviously. But I think we all know that if USC had to play UConn that year, it was going to be a lot tougher, to win that national title. And so, just being able to get over, that hump, win that first national title, I think that was the most important title.
And there's a lot of weight to it being the first one, right? Similar, we talked about the baseball national championships the other day. Like, there's significance to the first one as opposed to the second one. Second one's still great, but something about finally breaking through and winning that after never having won previously, though I feel like the caveat of beating UConn the second time around, where a lot of people say, hey, if you would have played UConn, much like LSU's national championship 2 seasons ago, like, well, if you played South Carolina again, you probably don't win that game. But again, being able to actually correct that a couple years later and say, okay, we beat UConn, the standard in women's basketball for the past 30 years under Gino, and that, adds more gravity to that national championship, much like beating Caitlin Clark and the Iowa team this year did.
Yeah, and I would say this too. I mean, UConn, they haven't fallen off by much, but they've fallen. Right? UConn is not the same UConn women's basketball program that they were 10 years ago.
Well, I don't know if it's them falling or everybody else catching up.
Maybe. Or maybe it's one program, South Carolina, it's just being so much better than really the rest. That might be part of it too. But, like 10, 20 years ago, the best recruits were going to UConn, right?
Sure.
I mean, that was it.
Wouldn't you?
That was the standard, right?
You were going to win national championships. You were going to go to the WNBA.
Right.
Like it was a factory.
Right. I mean, UConn, Stanford, those programs. And now, if you're the best in the country, you're probably going to South Carolina. So I think there's something to be said for both, I think, of those arguments. But I just say that because I don't think it holds the same weight today in 2024 as maybe it did 10 years ago. I don't know. I realize that they're still going to Final Fours, but it doesn't feel like they're still the queens.
The best problem to have is having to decide which of your national championships are better than the other ones.
That is true.
Right?
Yeah. 100%.
It's like picking your favorite child. It's like, well, they're all great, but do I really like one more than the other?
I don't have any kids, so I can't speak from experience, but I do know people who have kids. The majority do have a favorite child.
Well, you're not supposed to admit that.
No,
to
you're
your
not.
child.
No, you can't. You can't ever admit that to your kid. But
I do know that much.
Yeah.
We'll get to Bill Connolly's list of biggest games in the SEC coming up in just a little bit, but I had an idea for a discussion yesterday that I really want to dive into and want to get people's thoughts as well on the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-446-100. There have been 6 coaches that have won national championships in the SEC since the year 2000.
Yeah.
How should we rank them? It's coming up next. It's the Halftime Show. He's Mike Gillespie. I'm Tyler Head on your Thursday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head, Mike Gillespie with you on this Thursday on the game. We're still in the midst of talking season as we get into August, so it's a season for lists, it's a season for rankings, the whole 9 yards. Sometimes you get hit with inspiration at the most random times. I was pumping gas yesterday, and this idea popped in my head. There have been 6 SEC coaches that have won national championships at SEC schools. That is important to note here. Since the year 2000, keeping in theme with the greatest Gamecock moments since 2000. Those being Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, Les Miles, Gene Chizik, Ed Orgeron, and most recently Kirby Smart at Georgia. How do we rank these guys? 1 to 6.
Yeah.
From best to who is the worst national championship winning head coach in the SEC since the turn of the millennium?
So I think number 1 is easy. Right? It's Saban,
no debate about it. But at 2 different schools, by the way.
Yes, 2 different SEC schools. You and I were talking off air about this, and you and I were comparing Urban Meyer to Kirby Smart. Funny enough, I'm the Florida grad, you're the Georgia grad.
Right.
My initial reaction was, well, there are 2 schools of thought, right? Like, it might be easier to win a national title now in this era in the last 10 years because there is a playoff, right?
Sure.
Whereas before, it was only the top 2. So you get into that, but there's also the addition of that extra game. Yeah, okay. Here's how I'm going to break this down. So if you want to compare Urban and Kirby.
Which for number 2.
Really diving into their numbers.
Yes.
Urban was at Florida for 6 years, right? Won 2 national championships, 2 SEC championships, won 3 division titles, won the East 3 times. Kirby has won 4. They have the same numbers, so 2 national championships. And then Kirby, though, has won 4 SEC East division titles in 6 years. That's or in his first 6 years. He's been there for 8, but I just looked at his 6 years to try to compare it to Urban. So 4 out of 6 obviously is better than 3 out of 6.
Sure.
We're totally splitting hairs here, but I have to go with Kirby.
Yeah, it's a tough debate for sure. And I also think you can look at the state of what the conference was, because Florida winning their national championship in 2006 started that long run of SEC teams winning the national championship.
Yeah.
LSU won in 2007, Florida won in 2008, and it just kind of kept on like that for a couple of years. So the league was just kind of coming to its dominant prominence with those early Florida teams, as opposed to Kirby Smart's era, where it was already the best, and Nick Saban and all that kind of stuff that you were having to go up against. So, and the thing is, it's tough because like Kirby's story is not done yet. Like he's still got a long time left as head coach at Georgia. Could be more in national championships, SEC titles, the whole 9 yards. So that little snapshot of what we have so far compared to what Urban Meyer did, which was a lot in just 6 years there, which it felt like it was a whole lot longer. It's almost kind of like a 2A and 2B kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to scapegoat with the answer. I'd probably lean towards Kirby a little bit, and maybe that's my bias speaking on that. But it's definitely tough to split the 2.
Here's the difference, and I know Georgia just lost to Alabama in the SEC title game.
Right.
But here's what I'll say about this. Saban knocked off Urban, right?
Yep.
It seemed like Urban was going to rule college football for years. Like in 2008, my sophomore year at Florida, I covered the orange and blue game, and it was Tim Tebow against Cam Newton. And
Insane.
I didn't think that Florida was ever going to lose a game again.
Sure.
I was like, oh my God, this is just peak college football. Like, this is the greatest team I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
They were the kings of college football, and Saban knocked them off. Saban comes in, new king, Kirby knocks him off. So I put a little bit more weight on somebody had to do it.
Sure.
And, you can make the argument that Urban did it at Ohio State too, but if we're strictly talking about the SEC, then I think you got to go Kirby. Yeah.
So that settles our top 3 of Saban, Smart, and Urban Meyer. The bottom 3 is where this gets interesting. So you have Les Miles, 2007 national champion at LSU, which, by the way, they had 2 losses that year, including was it triple overtime loss to Arkansas in the last week of the regular season? Yes. 2007 was a nuts season, and rightfully so, had a 2-loss national champion to boot. Gene Chizik with that stellar Cam Newton Auburn team back in 2010, and then Ed Orgeron with what might be the most stacked college football team of all time in the 2019 season there for LSU. all these guys, when you talk about their national championships, always have the yeah, but associated with it because they had these magical seasons, but it wasn't indicative as a whole of how good their era was there.
Yes. I think number 6 is easy because Gene Chiswick's it seemed very much like a flash in the pan. If he didn't have Cam Newton, they wouldn't have won the national title, right?
Right.
I think Les Miles was a lot more consistent over the years, so I think that I put him as a better head coach than Ed Orgeron. So I think Les Miles would have to get the nod over Ed Orgeron.
If Nick Saban was not at Alabama doing what Nick Saban was doing at Alabama, LSU probably has a couple more national championships with Les Miles.
Totally agree.
Because that was their only knock is like, well, they're not consistently better than Alabama.
Yes.
And they played for another national championship against each other
Bama.
in the 2011 season. So, like, he was always right there. And the Alabama LSU games during that era, and we hit the game of the century in 2011, 96, overtime, all that kind of stuff. That was the biggest game in college football every single year.
Yeah.
Every single year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. You just look at Les Miles' numbers. I mean, the first 3 years. I mean, he lost 6 games.
Yeah.
I mean, he went 11-2, 11-2, 12-2. Like, in your first 3 years, like, I mean, I get it. It's LSU, right? Like, that's what you probably should do at LSU. But, I mean, that's really, really impressive. And I know it kind of fell off after that a little bit, but then 2010 and 2011, great seasons. So, I just think that he's been much, much, much more of a consistent head coach.
And the knock on Les Miles initially, even in that national championship year in 2007, was that he did it with a lot of guys left over from the Saban era. Because back then the transfer portal wasn't what it was. So you inherited most of the team from whoever left or got fired or whatever it may be. So that's why a lot of people said, yeah, but is it really him or is it really just Saban's guys? But again, to make another national champion years later with an entire roster of your guys, funny enough, playing Nick Saban, I think that does speak to what Les Miles was as a head coach, was as a recruiter, that he kept the train rolling after all of Saban guys had filtered out.
Yeah, and I mean, you can make that argument with a lot of schools. Like, they, the people that hated Urban Meyer at Florida, always made that point that, hey, a lot of these 06 guys were recruited by Ron Zook. Ron Zook had incredible recruiting classes, like ridiculous. He just couldn't win with them. That's part of the reason why he got fired. It's like, you're not winning, and you're top 5 every year in recruiting classes. Like, how is that possible?
Right.
You can make that argument really anywhere. Which I'm interested to see, like Kalen DeBoer, like in his first couple of years, like if it tails off by like year 4 or 5. Those arguments are going to start.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
1,000%. But I would agree. Les Miles probably occupies that 4th spot because he had a little more sustained, consistent success. Ed Orgeron, if he applied himself after the national championship, because here's the thing. He just checked out.
Yeah.
He got the title.
Sure.
Was the most beloved man in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm just going to put it in cruise control. Wasn't vetting coaches when hiring them, just hiring his buddies, like wasn't paying attention to recruiting. Like, he literally accomplished the goal and said, I'm going to cruise for the rest of the time here. And the program quickly slipped to being a 500 team in the years after that. If he would have given it 100% in the years after the national championship, which again, the national championship relied a lot on the talent that he had, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, all those talented guys across that team. If he tried in the years after that, he might still be at LSU. I don't know if he wins another national championship, but I think we could be talking about him in the same way we're talking about Miles. Like, yes, the one national championship was maybe because of just the talent he had on the roster, but he was still a good, consistent coach outside of that. Because leading up to that, in his 3 years at LSU before, 6-2 on an interim basis, 9-4, 10-3, and then the 15-0 undefeated regular national championship season. Like, he showed you he could do it. And then he just decided to check out after he won the whole thing.
And it makes you appreciate that much more guys like Kirby and Nick Saban, right? Bob Stoops, guys that did it for a long, long time. Spurrier, right? Like, guys who were consistent winners over a long period of time, because it's so hard to do. And it's like mentally taxing, physically taxing, and that's why a lot of these guys get out of the business, right? It's just too much, right?
Sure.
That's why Urban did.
Sure.
Well, that's what he said.
Allegedly.
Anyway. A lot of people down there think that if Nick Saban, never existed, then like Urban probably would have been there for 20 more years. But still, like, it's tough to win every year, and it does just make you appreciate the guys that are able to put in the work every year to make their teams the best that they can be. It's hard work, and even some of the greats like Urban, right? Like they just lose it after a while. They don't have that same, get up that they did when they first started coaching. It's tough.
Yeah. Well, and especially for a guy like Urban Meyer, who is running such an innovative type of offense, the game catches up to you at some point to where maybe not necessarily everybody's doing it that way, but they're doing it their own way that balances the playing field a little bit, because his run and shoot offense when he was at Utah was very innovative.
For sure.
And it's what helped them have their undefeated season, Alex Smith being the number 1 overall pick, and he rolled that right into Florida, which is where Tim Tebow thrived in that system.
Right.
But again, the game catches up to everybody.
Yeah. Well, and it took a defensive mastermind, right, to slow that down. Yeah. And I remember, talking to Florida's old AD, Jeremy Foley. I think maybe we were talking about this, but, we were that you and I were talking about this, but Jeremy and I were talking about why Will Muschamp, after Urban. And he said to me, when so many athletics departments were going offense, right?
Yeah.
Like they were mimicking other athletics departments. We wanted to go defense and try to stop it because it worked so well at Alabama. Mm-hmm. And, and obviously, like, it didn't work at Florida, but Kirby worked out so well at Georgia. And, it's tough. You just have to consistently innovate. And when you find a guy like Nick Saban who's able to stop your offense, it's makes your quarterback cry and game over.
We'll come back, wrap up hour number 1, hit our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. It is the halftime show. He's Michael Espy. I'm Tyler Head on your Thursday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Mike Gillespie, along with you on your Thursday. It is time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. Nameless texter weighs in and says, this feels like Alshon Jeffrey's freshman year where the receiver rotation is not clear until the middle of the season. Alshon Jeffrey, of course, one of the great all-time South Carolina wide receivers who emerged in his freshman year.
Sure.
Starting about half those games he got towards later in the season, ended up being the leading receiver that year. But it definitely kind of echoes that a little bit to where even through those first couple of weeks against Old Dominion, Kentucky, LSU, it might be a mix where you're trying out different options, trying out different combinations of guys, seeing what kind of is your best options at wide receiver 3 or 4 guys, depending on what your sets are, before you kind of hopefully figure it out before you hit the thick of conference play in October.
Yeah, and I thought Alshon Jeffrey should have been pumping gas. Is that right? No? Never mind.
By the way,
good old Lane.
I saw him in person last year when they honored him at whatever game that was.
Massive.
What a freak athlete.
He is
huge. Enormous. Yeah. Oh, my God.
Yeah, you go back and you watch that game that he had against Alabama, and it was just it felt unfair at times against the corners. I mean, it was like he had, like 6 inches on all of them, like the wingspan, and I mean, just so fast and, just caught everything. I mean, like, it's got to be like quarterback's favorite target. I mean, that's why Garcia threw to him so much. You just throw it up in the air and he gets it. And, Spurrier always loved guys like that. Like any good offensive, coordinator, coach is going to love a dude who's, what is Alshon, 6'4"?
Yeah.
Is that right?
He's huge.
Yeah. Anyway, so, but yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, you know who your number one receiver is going to be. I think everybody thinks Nick Harbor's going to be the number one. However,
is he ready for that?
Is he ready for that? I mean, if he participated in the Olympics, I think that answer is a clear-cut no.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
Not ready for SEC ball. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's just a different.
He would not be getting back on the field until a week and a half before the season starts.
Would not have worked.
Yeah.
Just the freak athleticism, the size. He's got. I mean, if somebody surpasses him as the number one wide receiver, I'd be very surprised.
Yeah.
But from his talent too. I mean, he's incredible.
And that's certainly the hope by the time we get to the end of the year, much like Alshon Jeffrey's freshman year, where he's at the top of the list of receptions, touchdowns, all that kind of stuff when it's all said and done, to where we look back and say he was the best receiver that season. It may not start out that way, though, because, again, there is that integration process, development, all that kind of stuff that he just wasn't there for in the spring. I mean, he was around as much as he could be, was interacting with the coaches and his fellow wide receivers, but there's a difference between sitting in the meetings and being out there on the field actually perfecting your craft that he just didn't have a lot of time for because he was doing the track stuff. So he may not come out of the gate as that number one option, but by the time you get to Alabama and Oklahoma, you certainly hope that things have progressed along nice enough to where that is probably the case. Will it happen? We hope so, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, and I think the key there, in my opinion, you always want to get your best playmakers the ball early on in games in the season, right? Because you just want as many reps as possible. You want them to get a feel for the games. You hope that maybe you start a little easy, like end arounds, whatever. I mean, he's the fastest guy in the SEC.
Use his athleticism to your strength.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so, make it easy at first and then, maybe, expand the playbook from there a little bit. But take advantage of that speed because if you don't, then you're wasting a gift.
My go-to play in EA College Football 25 is the jet pop pass.
Nice. Yeah.
It's a guarantee 8 to 10 yards every single time. Do that. Have him run in motion and then just pop the ball to him and let the speed take care of the rest.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a blessing to have for a quarterback when you've got a receiver that size and somebody with that much speed. I wonder too, maybe defenses start to just double team them and make, USC figure out who that second option is, pretty quickly. Sure. I don't know. But, I do know that you got to sort of take advantage of that speed and open field. And that's the one thing, honestly, Tyler, I'm super excited about this year because you've got a quarterback now that can run the football really, really well. It seems like you got a lot of speed on offense. It's kind of given me like Urban vibes a little bit. I'm like, could we see like a little bit of an option? Like, I know that's not like, it's probably not what Dow wants to run, but like, I'm also could we take advantage of this?
And Dow Loggins has been very tight-lipped, as is everybody on the team, as you would expect. Until we see it on display, you can let your imagination run wild. If you want to think they're going to run an option type of offense, maybe they will. I would say probably not.
Probably not.
It could be nuances of that in goal-line situations or whatever it may be. So really, the possibilities are endless when you have that kind of talent on your offense. 1 hour down, 2 more hours to go. It is the halftime show. He is Mike Gillespie. I'm Tyler Head. It is Thursday. We'll jump back into the camp discussion. I had an interesting question I wanted to pose about Lenora Sellers. That's coming up. It is the halftime show here on The Game.
Baroque.
1 o'clock. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Mike Gillespie along with you. It is time for football, and more football in the 1 o'clock hour, brought to you by Atlantic Windows and Doors. I wanted to pose a question. So as we enter this new year of SEC play, we don't really have quarterback competitions going on across the league, as you would say. In years past, there's usually a handful, like Alabama was one of the ones last year. We didn't know who the starter was going to be going up into week number 1. Maybe Vanderbilt, but it seems like Diego Pavia from New Mexico State's going to get the nod out there. So for the most part, it seems like all 16 starters have been solidified across the league. So we kind of know what we're getting there. You have returners like the Milrose and the Carson Becks and the Quinn Ewers that are kind of in that top shelf elite category when it comes to SEC quarterbacks. Kind of have that second tier, the Jackson Darts, the Brady Cooks, guys that you've seen start for a couple years that you kind of know what to expect.
Sure.
And then you have a group of 5 guys that have never been full-time starters in the SEC up to this point that we still have questions about. Those being Lenora Sellers, the Brock Vandegrift at Kentucky, Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, Nico at Tennessee, and Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma. Now the difference is Nussmeier, Nico, and Arnold have all started before. Sure. All 3 of those guys started bowl games at the end of last year, where we got at least a 1-game sample size of what they're capable of.
Sure.
Some of them were really good, like Nico. Some of them not so good, like Jackson Arnold.
Right.
But we go into this year with Lenora Sellers and Brock Vandegrift both being relative unknowns outside of the garbage time they've both gotten to play in, more for Brock Vandegrift because he's been in college football longer than his time at Georgia. But for Sellers, we saw, 4 passes last year, a couple touchdowns. That was great. A couple runs, one of those being a touchdown against Vanderbilt. But we still don't know. We're just speculating on what he did in high school, his star rating, those brief glimpses last year. But going into being the guy every single snap for a full season, that's a whole different animal.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And look, if he had struggled when he got playing time last year, obviously the sentiment is different.
Sure.
Right? But he looked outstanding, when he got the ball. I mean, those passes that he was able to make against Furman, I mean, I know it's Furman, but dude, I mean, you're almost like, if Spencer's not your quarterback, maybe there's a quarterback controversy last year, right? I mean, that's how good he looked at times. But you got to remember, he's still a redshirt freshman, right? Yeah. He basically has 0 in-game experience, which is why I actually really like how USC's schedule shapes up early. I mean, we're talking Old Dominion at home, and then Kentucky. It's not like, you look at Florida, right? Miami out of the gate, right? You're starting off with, a manageable opponent at home, and then, you're going on the road, but it's not like it's an SEC powerhouse.
Sure.
It's a place that you won 2 years ago. Obviously, Lenora Sellers wasn't there, but it seems like on the schedule, Kentucky could fall into that list of games that USC could possibly win. So I feel like it's a nice sort of ease into the season.
And I think it's really important. That's a good point that you bring up from a confidence standpoint.
Yeah.
Because when you're going in as a starter for your first time, regardless who the opponent is, how you come away from that game can affect how you go the rest of the season. So if Sellers goes out there and, tosses for 220, a couple touchdowns, runs for another, maybe has 100 yards on the ground, he's going to be feeling great. And again, it doesn't matter the quality of opponent. You went out there and you did your job and you performed to the level people expected you to. That's going to carry over to that second game against Kentucky, as opposed to last year, if you started up against a North Carolina and you got thrown all around, threw some interceptions or whatever it may be, that confidence is going to be a whole lot more shaken, where, guys that are seniors and veterans that have been around the game for a while, they can shake those things off quicker. And I do think Lenore Sellers has a good head on his shoulders, but that's something that, whether he wanted to admit it or not, might affect him for a couple weeks as he tries to find his footing as a starter in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, the noise around college football players today is the loudest it's ever been, right? You can't. I know coaches love to say that we don't see it and we don't hear it, that we're insulated, but I don't really think that you can say that anymore.
Right.
I see the activity on social media from Lenora Sellers, right? And that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. Saying kids are young, right? When they're young, right, they're going to look at social media. I look at social media, and I'm 5 years old, right? It's hard to stay off of.
Sure.
So, yeah, like confidence is a real thing when you're talking about a 19, 20-year-old kid. I think he's got the talent to do it, man. I'm really excited, about the arm talent, but then, the bailout with the legs too. And I think the difference maker there too. We talked about this at the top of the show, but it's having running backs now. Sure. You take the pressure so much off your quarterback when you've got guys who can run the football. There was just, in my opinion, too much pressure on Spencer last year, right? Way too much pressure on his arm to make things happen. And look, it's a totally new offense, in my opinion, just because of that reason.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the point that I brought up earlier where you had Jackson Arnold and Nico and Garrett Nussmeier getting to start their respective bowl games last year, that, I think, changed the expectation in good ways and bad ways for what those guys were going to be in their first full year as starters. Now, Nussmeier's been around for a while. He was filling in for Jaden Daniels a couple years ago when he got hurt back in 2022. So people in LSU are a little more familiar with him. But Nico had a great bowl game against Iowa. So that already high anticipation of what he's supposed to be is going through the roof right now.
Yeah.
Jackson Arnold didn't have a great bowl game against Arizona. So I feel like, and I haven't talked to any Oklahoma people about it, but a lot of us look at that and are apprehensive. Like, okay, maybe he's not as great as people thought he was going to be. We're going to have to see what plays out there. And in a weird way, now theoretically, let's say South Carolina made a bowl game last year. Mm-hmm. Spencer said, you know what, I'm going to sit this one out, prepare for the draft, like a lot of quarterbacks end up doing.
She probably would have. Carolina would have finished 6-6, right?
Yeah. It's up for debate. We'll never know, obviously. But in this theoretical situation, let's say he does that, and Sellers gets the opportunity to start like these other guys did. The weight of what he does in that bowl game, and again, bowl games are such throwaways now because you got so many opt-outs and you got guys that aren't going to be on the team next year. So you can't put a ton of weight into that, but we do just because we've been inclined to do that for so long. So let's say they play a bowl game against whoever, Birmingham or something like that, the Birmingham Bowl, and he doesn't have a great performance. We're spending this entire offseason like, is he really the guy? Like, is this an indication of what he's going to be? Or if he goes out there and has a great performance, we're spending a lot of this offseason going, man, he's as advertised. He looks amazing. He's going to be great. Heisman Trophy, the whole 9 yards, first-round draft pick, whatever it may be. In a weird way, and I guess ignorance being bliss here, I kind of like the fact that we still don't know because I think it keeps people's expectations from getting too high and prevents them from being too low either because we're just going to have to wait and see when it actually matters in real games coming up in the fall.
As a culture, we overreact, right, to everything, especially fans. Our fandom gets in the way. And I think for a young kid, that could have shaken his confidence if he had a rough bowl game, right? So all of a sudden, this whole summer we're talking about, well, look at his numbers, right? Like that doesn't do anything for his confidence. I'm totally with you. Like honestly, Tyler, it seems like just a clean slate for him. You're starting from basically zero.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like I said, you've got the flashes against, Furman and like not totally from zero, but pretty much, right? Yeah. There aren't many expectations placed on Lenora Sellers right now, which I think is a really good thing for him in his young career. And like I said, I really do like the fact that, he's able to ease into the season, a little bit. It's, that second game, it's on the road, but at least it's not at LSU, right? It's not, at Florida or between the hedges or, like there are worse places to play than at Kentucky. Though I will say, underrated venue at night. They love their bourbon up there. They're very loud. I heard the last time I was up there was actually would have been 14. And they did not like Spurrier very much, and they made it very, very well known. But it gets loud there, but it's not, it's not these, incredible atmospheres, right? Sure. And I think if the schedule was designed that way, I'd be very apprehensive about what the rest of the season looked like.
And I think that allows you the opportunity to set parameters on expectations. Now, yes, would we love to see him go out there and throw for 3,000 yards and 30 touchdowns and run for another 15,000 yards? Absolutely. That'd be phenomenal. And he might earn his way into a trip to New York as a freshman. But I don't think anybody's setting that as the bar for what we expect him to do. I think it's reasonable to put, okay, X amount of yards through the air, have a good touchdown to interception ratio, run the ball a decent clip, have a few more touchdowns there. But as the season goes along, those expectations can change. But I think it's better to start at kind of 0 and continue to move up than kind of try and set it somewhere that you think is reasonable, but it's way too high.
Yeah.
And then as we're halfway through the year, it's like, okay, well, now we can hope that maybe he only does this or can get to this point or whatever, and dropping the expectations down, which again goes back to the psyche and mental aspect of playing quarterback. It's impossible to ignore the noise.
Yeah.
They hear what we say. They see what's out there on social media. It all goes back to them some kind of way, whether they tried to hear it or not. So if the conversation is, well, we thought you were going to do this, but now you're only doing this, that's going to affect you, especially as a young 18, 19-year-old kid, however old he is at this point in time. So coming in, as much as you would love him to have more experience, in a way, it's a bit of a blessing in a weird way that the expectations won't be astronomically high compared to what they could have been if he was in like Nico's shoes or something.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, look, like I said, we overreact, right? I mean, look at Graham Mertz at Florida, right? Like he was picked last year in quarterback rankings by almost everybody. They're like, who is this kid? He looked terrible at Wisconsin. Like, this isn't, this seems like a reach for Billy Napier. He goes out and has the highest completion percentage in the SEC last year.
Yep.
Like, okay, so this kid can play. His expectations were so low. I almost felt like he only could go up from there.
Yeah, pressure off.
Yeah, no, exactly. But that's the thing. Like, we have no idea. Like, it just proves that we have no idea what we're talking about, right? Like, that college football coaches, like there's a method behind their madness. They know a whole lot more than we do, and we just kind of have to sort of trust the process. But yeah, I mean, for a young kid, Graham Mertz is also, I think he's a graduate now, but he came in, I believe, as a senior, so he's a lot older than Lenoris. But yeah, with Lenoris, I feel like him being so young, it's good to not place so many expectations on him this summer, because they definitely hear it.
Reminder: the Ultimate Season Ticket Giveaway is back for another year, much like last year. It's on our website, 1075thegame.com. You can register for your chance to win tickets to every home football, baseball, and men and women's basketball game for South Carolina this upcoming season. Link getting online to 1075thegame.com and register. We'll bring our 3 finalists out to our summer golf event at Charwood Golf Club in West Columbia at the end of the month and crown our overall winner there. So again, 1075thegame.com. Click on the Ultimate Season Ticket Giveaway tab. I mentioned this earlier. I want to get to Bill Connolly's list of the top games across college football, but specifically in the SEC, coming up next. The halftime show. He is Mike Gillespie. I'm Tyler Head here on The Game. Welcome back in Halftime Show. Tyler Head, Michael Espy, along with you on your Thursday. Here on the game, I want to get to this. Bill Connelly put out his best college football games for the 2024 season on ESPN yesterday. This is mainly talking about Power 4 conferences, and we'll kind of focus in on the SEC here. One thing I love as we enter a new SEC with no more divisions, there's no more playing the same teams over and over again. It's going to be a lot of mixing and matching with the schedule now. It also eliminates Cupcake Saturday. So a lot of SEC fans for years maligned that typical next to last weekend in November where, your rivalry game's the next weekend, but you're going to play Wofford or you're going to play South Carolina State or whoever it is. And it wasn't just one team. Everybody did
it.
Now, that still exists. South Carolina is playing Wofford in that next to last week before Clemson, but you still have a variety of options. You got Oklahoma and Alabama that weekend. You got Missouri, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Florida. Like, you have other tangible offerings from the SEC that in years past wasn't as prevalent. So that is one big benefit of this schedule. We're going to get good SEC play every single week now.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, taking a look at some of these games that Bill Connelly listed, I mean, they're pretty much all de facto playoff games.
Right.
I mean, you go down the list and, like, I don't see one that's not. I mean, Georgia, Bama, Georgia, Texas, Missouri, Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, like, all of those teams should and probably will be in the playoff conversation by November.
And those first two games listed, Georgia at Alabama, September 28th, and Georgia at Texas, those are probably the two biggest prove-it games in the SEC this year because, and that's Kalen DeBoer's first conference game.
Sure.
Okay, prove it that this is still the Alabama everybody knows by taking on what many people consider to be the national championship favorite in Georgia.
Right.
Similar thing with Texas. All right, you made the playoff last year. You're back. We'll give you all those accolades. Now do it in the SEC. You get it at home. That's going to benefit you against, again, what is perceived to be one of the, if not the best teams in the country.
Yeah, because if you're Texas, right, and you lose to Georgia, then the narrative is you can kind of play with the SEC, but you can't beat the best in the SEC.
Sure.
And for years, that's kind of been the sentiment, right, with Texas. It's like, yeah, you're a good enough program to win games in the SEC and be successful.
Sure.
But can you beat Texas, or excuse me, can you beat Alabama? Can you beat Georgia? Can you take down the big dogs? And, honestly, man, like, they had a tough time doing it in the Big 12. So it's not just a shoe-in. This is a very different Texas than what we saw 10 years ago, obviously. But
sure.
But you're right. That is absolutely a sort of a gauge of where both of those programs stand.
And, for Texas, with a lot of people, last year was an incredible year. And they almost made the national championship and went out of the Big 12 riding as high as possible. But I think a lot of people want to see you do it again. Don't just give me 1 year, because there have been plenty of flash in the pan single-season teams that reverted back to the norm the year after. Shows you can do it, especially in the SEC, then I think most people will be comfortable saying, okay, Texas is finally back after all the false alarms for a decade plus that they had.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. Oklahoma is not listed by Bill Connelly, and I don't know how to take that. I know Oklahoma is not as good as Texas, right? But it feels like they're maybe getting a little disrespected, right?
I would say they weren't as good as Texas last year, and they still beat them at the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah, so it's I don't know. Like, I probably would have included them, but then of course you've got Alabama at LSU, and is this talk about gauging where your program is, like Brian Kelly, all right. Like, it's kind of put up or shut up, right?
Sure.
I mean, can you beat Alabama at home in November, like, to get your team in playoff contention? I mean, a lot of these games, man. Missouri, Bama. I still I know Missouri. I know Missouri's offense is great, right? I just don't know if I can buy them collectively as a team. Ole Miss has got players all over the field, and that's what they did in the transfer portal, brilliant, right?
Sure.
I don't know. Like I have a lot of questions about Missouri this year. So Missouri at Alabama seems to me like might be a little overrated.
The interesting thing about that game, Missouri has a really good shot of being 7-0 entering that game because that's at the end of October. Their schedule up to that point: Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt, A&M, UMass, and Auburn.
Wow.
Like, they should be able to win those games.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
And assuming Alabama, is going to be Alabama,
Sure.
has no losses or one loss, whatever it may be, like a top 10 matchup between Missouri and Alabama in Bryant-Denny Stadium in late October, like, that sounds so bizarre, but it could really happen.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, like it's funny, and I would pay good money to see some of these. I mean, like Georgia, Texas, like God, I mean that's Georgia, Alabama. Yeah, I mean, like those games are going to be absolutely brilliant this year. And Georgia at Ole Miss too. I mean, like Ole Miss has got a tough November. I mean, I know they play at the Swamp. What I think is it the week after? It might be the week after. So, I mean, you play Georgia.
So they have a bye week, and then
okay, gotcha. Yeah, so, I mean, that's still pretty tough, though. Thank goodness for that bye for them. But and then, obviously, Alabama, LSU, I mean, that's just a great matchup, every year, it seems like. So, I not too many issues with this list, except, I would like to see Oklahoma at some point there.
Well, and again, as the season goes along, our perception on these teams and these games is going to shift. Again, LSU, I don't know how good they're going to be. I think, like we talked about earlier, that game used to be the game in college football every year because you were going to get a top 5 matchup between Alabama and LSU. This year, I mean, we kind of assume LSU's going to be good, but we don't know that for sure because you're replacing a lot of really good talent. Same thing with Alabama. Like, could we go into November the 9th where both those teams have 3 losses and are no longer factors for the college football playoff?
Could
Absolutely.
be. Sure.
That could really happen.
Sure.
I don't think it's going to happen, but we don't know until we get there. But until we see otherwise, we're just naturally going to think, oh, Alabama and LSU, that's a huge game.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it kind of goes back to, it's funny, like, Billy Napier was asked this, a ton at SEC Media Days, right? Like, number 1 strength of schedule in the country, blah, 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 blah. And, Napier, you and I have talked about this. Like, he's very vanilla. Like, he's, he'll
put you to sleep.
He will. He's a good dude, really good dude. Like, doesn't like to, criticize much, but he started to say something really interesting. And he said something like, these aren't the same teams as last year, right? It's a logo schedule. And then he caught himself because I think he felt like he started going down like a critical path.
Sure.
And, he's like, neither are we. So, to his point, it's like we expect these teams to be good just because obviously, returning quarterbacks and the lines of scrimmage and, like the talent around those quarterbacks, right, at places like Georgia and Texas and Alabama. But, there's a strong possibility that, by November they could have 2 to 3 losses. And then it's like, well, I mean, this team wasn't what we thought it was going to be at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're going to have to see how it plays out as season goes along, and our narratives on these teams are certainly going to shift as that plays out. In the last hour, we discussed SEC coaches that won national championships since the year 2000. I want to go to the opposite end of the spectrum. Who are the worst SEC coaching hires since the year 2000? This is a list we can have a lot of fun with. We'll dive into that coming up next. It is the Halftime Show. He's Michael Espy. I'm Tyler Head on your Thursday on the Game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head, Mike Gillespie with you on your Thursday here on The Game. As I mentioned in the last hour, we talked about the best of coaches in the SEC since the year 2000, kind of keeping on theme with what we've been talking about all week with our greatest Gamecock moment since the year 2000 with coaches that had won the national championship since the turn of the century. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum now. The worst head coaching hires since the year 2000. I was scrolling through just random different websites yesterday, and I came across this list from 2018 on 24/7 Sports, and it is titled The Worst Coaches in the SEC, and this is talking about ever, so the 100 or almost 100-year history of the SEC. Didn't want to go quite that extreme, so I figured to stay on theme, we'd go since the year 2000. And oh boy, there have been some really bad coaching hires since the year 2000.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to me, the worst, I think, was Chad Morris at Arkansas.
Pretty bad.
0-14, right, in the SEC. And it's crazy, too, because I covered Chad at Clemson, and Chad was such an innovative mind. And I really thought, okay, this guy, they're going to put up some numbers.
Sure.
And for so many reasons, they just couldn't get it together. I mean, going 0-14 in your conference, I mean, that's got to make you the worst of all time, right?
Well,
No conference with, at least Derek Dooley had a couple.
Right. And I think you and I talked about this yesterday. He came up for some reason, but, he was hired there for the connection of the Texas pipeline.
Yes.
Because, and something that they're losing with Texas coming into the conference now, is that was one advantage Arkansas had recruiting against Longhorns. Hey, come play in the SEC, come play in the SEC. So when you had a guy that had a long history of coaching in the state of Texas, they thought, hey, this guy's going to be able to get us those recruits to help us build this program into what we want it to be. And in 2 seasons there, when you go 0-14 against conference opponents, didn't even make it into the 7th and 8th game of second year. So probably could have gone 0-16 for being honest here.
Disaster.
But as bad can get to get fired before the end of year number 2.
Yeah, and I mean, don't forget about Florida, too. I mean, his connections to Florida. I mean, so many guys who played at Clemson, C.J. Spiller, for instance, he was instrumental in getting C.J. Spiller, I believe, out of Union County down there. I mean, look, like his connections to both of those states, I mean, and he did great things at SMU, as well. Like, it just seemed like a natural fit. Sure. And, for whatever reason, it didn't work. But, Derek Dooley is on there, too. Is he number 1? Was he the worst? No, wasn't the worst. Was he?
He's not the worst, but he's definitely in that conversation when you talk about things going bad. Because you went from Philip Fulmer, I mean, legendary national championship winning head coach that was at the helm for a long time. And then you went to Lane Kiffin, and they went 7-5 in his 1 year, but it was still a pretty solid season, and there was reason to believe that success was going to continue, which is why people in Knoxville still, want to punch you in the face anytime you bring his name up because of what it could have been for that program. And he obviously went to Southern Cal, and the rest is kind of history there. But Derek Dooley, again, legacy. Vince Dooley's his dad. It seems like a good hire. 4-19. Like, it just, nothing worked for him there. Yeah,
awful. It's funny, that whole Lane situation too. Like, I remember I remember hearing that news, being like, I don't think as a Tennessee fans can be obviously angry, and they still are, but it's like, can you blame him? I mean, like, he grew up around Southern Cal, right? His dad was the defensive coordinator for USC. Like, it's his home. I understand the way he left, right? Like, after one season, but I would say that he also, the karma came to him as well, getting fired on the tarmac.
It did, and that was 15 years ago now, which is crazy to think about. But nowadays, we're not shocked when a guy like Jimbo Fisher leaves Florida State to go to Texas A&M for a huge bag of money. But back then, leaving what was thought to be a top-tier job to go to another top-tier job wasn't as prevalent. So him leaving Tennessee, especially after how promising that first year was, remember, if Terrence Cody doesn't block the field goal, they beat number 1 Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And that would have been a great feather in his cap and would have made him leaving all that more painful for the people there in Knoxville. But it's just something we didn't see a whole lot. And again, now it's a little bit more of a norm to where, you'd still be upset, but it's like, okay, that's just the nature of college football now. So it was something that wasn't done as often back then, which is what made it so surprising.
Yeah, I guess my counter to that, though, would be it wasn't random. Yeah. Like, like I said, I mean, he had ties to Southern Cal. I mean, that was his school. That's where he grew up. Like, his dad was the defensive coordinator. Like, it made sense, right? It wasn't just like completely random. But no, I definitely understand what you're saying. Yeah, I guess the other one on here was the one that you mentioned was Brian Harsin at Auburn.
Auburn's a different animal. Can we all admit that? Coaching on the Plains requires you to be a little different, right? Hugh Freeze,
sure,
Gus Malzahn, guys like that we feel like are good fits for the Auburn program. Brian Harsin wasn't that guy. Brian Harsin, very similar to what Kalen DeBoer dealt with when he first got to Alabama. Well, that guy ain't from around here.
Yeah.
He's from Boise State. What's he know about Alabama?
Yes.
And the question immediately turns to recruiting. And Kalen DeBoer, though he hasn't coached a game yet, has been killing it on the recruiting trail. He's alleviated a lot of those concerns, like, hey, we're still clicking here, don't worry about it. Brian Harsin couldn't have cared less about recruiting.
To be honest with you, I thought that the number one threat to Kalen DeBoer not getting that Alabama job was Brian Harsin. Because I felt like Alabama's administration was going to look at that and say, you know what, like, it didn't work.
Sure.
It was a culture thing. Let's stay away from the guys from the Northeast.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, he's never coached in the Southeast. At least Brian Harsin had.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he was at Texas and Arkansas State or something. I don't remember.
He was at Arkansas State for a season.
Yeah.
Was an assistant at Texas. So he'd been in the area, but as a head coach, he had primarily been at Boise State.
And he's from Boise, and he was the quarterback at Boise State in the 90s. And so that honestly, that never made sense to me. And let's be real, too. Like, Boise State, if you're from the Northeast, it's a cool program to play for.
Right.
Other than that, if you're from the Southeast, you're not playing at Boise State.
Sure.
I'm not saying that it's easy to recruit Boise State, but I think that there's a different outlook when you're in the Northeast.
And look, he clashed with media. The culture in the locker room wasn't good. And then the recruiting thing where, again, this is what got Dan Mullen fired at Florida. Mm-hmm. If you're not pounding the pavement, beating down the doors of 4- and 5-star guys, you're not going to last. You're not going to be successful. And Brian Harsin was like, we're fine.
Yeah.
I'll get a team of 3 stars and we'll be okay. No, you're not.
You can't do that.
Not at Auburn. And now, that being said, he took Alabama to the limit in his first Iron Bowl. But, again, that was with a lot of Gus Malzahn's players, so you can't put all that on him necessarily. But the future of what that program was going to be was looking very bleak if he stayed at the helm.
Yeah, they had to get rid of him. Same reason that Florida had to get rid of Dan Mullen, right? Like, I mean, at some point recruiting matters, and you can't come out and publicly say that, well, we'll talk about recruiting when it's time to talk about recruiting. No, like
my rule, ABC, always be recruiting.
Yeah, no, for sure, absolutely. Like, and look, there's a whole lot more with the Mullen stuff that behind scenes, like he just didn't get along with anybody. He was a pain to work with, and he had a lot of. It's interesting. You and I have talked about this a lot. Like the successful model for a Florida head coach, right? It's cocky, white, offensive-minded, guru,
right?
And that's, I think, why Florida fans were really excited about Dan Mullen. But, he also carried that swag without actually earning it.
Sure.
He wanted to be Spurrier mixed with Urban Meyer, but he felt entitled the minute that he got on campus.
Sure.
And, I mean, look, he was pretty successful instantaneously.
Right.
He was. But it also goes to show you that if you don't recruit, your program's going to fall off in the matter of 1 year.
And again, that's just a couple of quick examples I could think of. I mean, I'd lost count at how many coaches have been hired and fired since the year 2000 across all. I mean, like Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State wasn't a good one. That was his, you're going to have to drag me out of here in a pine box or something like that. Well, he left pretty soon thereafter. So if you have a different option for terrible head coaching hires in the SEC since 2000. Hit us up, Firehouse Subs text line, 834-462-100.
Mike Shula?
Ooh.
Maybe. It wasn't absolutely disastrous.
And Gamecock assistant Mike Shula now.
But Yeah, but his time at Alabama obviously was not great.
Not great. Speaking of Alabama, I say this half jokingly. The Mike Price era, with he was undefeated, never lost a game.
Yeah,
but there was that other thing that happened.
Right.
Listen, if you're gonna do it, don't leave the credit card.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we could think of a few more, but no, I think Chad Morris has got to take the cake on that one.
Yeah,
0-14, like that's 0-14 in the SEC. That'll get you to be the at the top of that list.
Yeah, that is not too reassuring in any regard there. So again, if you have a different option, let us know. Firehouse Subs text on 803-404-6100. We'll hit our Firehouse Subs text of the hour. Coming up next, wrap up hour number 2 of the halftime show here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Mike Gillespie along with you, wrapping up hour number 2. Time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. Josh from Lexington weighs in on our debate of worst SEC head coaching hires since the year 2000 with Joker Phillips.
That's a good one.
The last coach before Mark Stoops got there. Mark Stoops is the longest tenured SEC head coach right now, for those that are not aware now that Nick Saban has retired. But yes, Joker Phillips, 3 seasons, 13-24 overall, 4-20 in conference play, including 0-8 in his last year in 2012. Pretty bad. I don't know if it's 0-14 bad, but it's definitely in the conversation.
Well, and I guess the reason why I mentioned Shula too is because at a place like Alabama, you can't do that, right? So, at Kentucky back then, that was just kind of the norm, right? Like, it wasn't terrible if you didn't go to a bowl game.
Sure.
Now, I mean, obviously Mark Stoops has risen that program to where they expect to go 8-4, 9-3, 10-2, even. That's a great year.
To be in a bowl game
every single year.
That's pretty much
it. Yep. But 20 years ago, that wasn't Kentucky. So for me, like I don't know if that holds as much weight as if you fail at one of the blue blood college football programs. I mean, hey, Ron Zook at Florida, right?
Sure.
Like, look at that. I mean, it wasn't terrible, right? Like, he got to a bowl game, I think, every year, but it was an average of 7 wins a year?
Well, and I think that's why we go back to the Chad Morris thing at Arkansas. Arkansas went to a couple of SEC championship games.
Yeah.
They were routinely a pretty solid to good team in the SEC. And then you have a guy like Chad Morris come along who, again, was supposed to be this innovative offensive mind that was going to take them to the next level, and they just completely bombed. So, yeah, it's not like they were coming in there expecting them to win national championships, but it's like, okay, can you get this program to being a perennial 8 to 9 to 10 win team? Like, I don't think that was out of the realm of asking, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's funny. I'd like to. I know we kind of touched on this a little bit with national championships, but at some point, I feel like we should do a deep dive into the best SEC college football coaching hires that incorporates just expectations, right? Too. In my opinion, what Dan Mullen did at Mississippi State has got to go down as one of the greatest coaching performances in history, right? Sure. Oh my God, you took Mississippi State to a number 1 ranking,
the first ever college football playoff number 1 team.
What? I mean, that to me is insane. So putting some context behind that, obviously what Nick Saban did at Alabama, right? That's always going to be number 1. Yes, it is Alabama, but 7 national titles, it's insane. At some point we should do that. That would be good. Not taking into account just championships.
If you're going to have that conversation, I think Jimbo Fisher could be in this realm too, because they weren't awful. But for what you paid him and what he was supposed to do with the resources and recruiting classes that he brought in, they were supposed to be a national championship level team. Best they did was 5th in 2020, just missing out on the playoff. But since then, and there's a reason that he got fired last year, because they were just average. And if you got paid $30 million to come coach there over the course of 10 years, that's one thing. But $100 million, you're a $100 million coach, and you can't do better than 8-4 on most years. That's unacceptable. So. For what the expectations were, he failed miserably.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think I told you this, but one of my favorite guys in the world is Frank Martin, right? He and I are great friends, and I was, when they fired Frank, it was tough on me because I loved Frank. But you sit there and you look, you're like, dude, you're in the top 20 in coach's salary in college basketball, and you're not getting top 20 results. Right. So at some point, right, it's an easy call. With Jimbo, it was a very easy call.
Yeah. I think I had some people weighing on the text line as well that Muschamp would be in that category. Yeah. Now, look, they had good seasons. I mean, they were fine.
Yes.
It wasn't consistent enough. And yes, the ending was very ugly and the program was not in a good place. But I wouldn't categorize them as one of the worst hires since 2000.
Here's a question for you too, Tyler. When is it ever good? Okay, Saban at Alabama, right?
Sure.
a great ending, right? You made the college football playoff. Like, you overachieved. Like, people honestly didn't think that you're going to beat Georgia in the SEC title game. You beat Georgia, you know, like, you almost are able to advance to the national championship game.
Right.
You know, like, that was a great ending. But, like, I mean, how many other great endings are there really in college football? I mean,
if Harbaugh never comes back, he got to ride off in the sunset with the national championship, but that's certainly few and far between, which is a really funny way of thinking about when somebody gets hired. It's like, well, this guy's either going to retire here or we're going to fire him, or he's going to leave for another job. Like, there's really no in between on that.
Or get burnt out.
Or get burned out and
having headaches and leave.
I know, heart problems, headaches, whatever it may be, till you know, the next desirable job ends up opening up. But that is very interesting because, rarely, even like a Spurrier, who, again, legendary Hall of Fame coach, and his last year was bad, and he stepped away in the middle of the season because you just couldn't take it anymore. So you don't always get to go off riding off into the sunset, unfortunately.
And people would have a very different outlook here in town, here in Columbia, South Carolina fans, on Steve Spurrier had he left after that Miami win. 100%.
And we don't have time for this in this segment, but we did an entire show last year on people's thoughts on Spurrier, because a lot of people are still very upset. As opposed to, if he decided to retire after one of the better years they had and say, all right, I want to end on top, that's it. We'd probably have a statue of him down there by Willie B. So it's crazy what that small little difference can make. We'll come back, hour number 3, get to what's trending at 2. Coming up, it's the halftime show. Michael Espy, Tyler Head here on The Game. Hour number 3, welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head, Mike Gillespie along with you here on The Game. Again, one more hour to go. Actually going to be hearing from Coach Beamer to start off 3 o'clock hour as he goes through media day as well as the assistant coaches and all the players ahead of tomorrow's start of fall camp. So you'll be able to listen to that on with Jay and Elijah coming up here in in the 3 o'clock hour on your Thursday. It is time for What is Trending at 2, and big news coming out of Athens. Ra Thomas, wide receiver for the Georgia Bulldogs, has officially been dismissed from the program, according to Kirby Smart when he met with media earlier on today. Ra Thomas was arrested last week on battery and child cruelty charges. This was not the first time that he'd been arrested with some severe charges like this, and he's officially been dismissed from the team. He caught, 23 balls for 383 yards and 1 touchdown after transferring over from Mississippi State. The prior season was expected to be a really big part of this Georgia offense this year.
Yeah, I mean, with all the talent that Georgia lost last year on the offensive side of the ball, he was supposed to be the go-to receiver. That's a big loss for Georgia right before the season, obviously. But, if you're Kirby, you had to do it. I mean, look, if you get charged with a felony, you're off the team, right? That is a team rule that should be a team rule everywhere.
Right.
And this was his third or fourth incident. I mean, a lot more if you're counting traffic incidents as well. Sure. At some point, a guy's got to figure it out somewhere else.
And a lot of people have been critical of the Georgia program here as of late with all the driving violations and stuff like that. And those are certainly serious things. This is at a different level. Mm-hmm. So I don't think you're going to kick guys off the team for going 20 miles per hour over the speed limit. There are other ways you can address that, ways that we're quite frankly not going to know about until those players or the coaches end up talking about it down the line. Those things get handled internally. But when you have something like this, you do have to go this far. And I'll attest from my time covering Georgia, he's dismissed players like this before. Jeremiah Holloman, who was also a wide receiver back in the summer of 2019, was expected to be a big contributor on the offense. He had a similar domestic violence charge up against him from a year prior. And when it came to light, they kicked him off the team. I think he went down to Florida Atlantic to finish out his college career. But, he has a history of making sure that these things do not, keep going on his program. And, again, when you're trying to wrangle 100 different people, you can't preside over all of them. You can spread your message. You can say, here's what we expect. Here's the standard we're going to hold you to. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. There's going to be problems. We talked about those Florida teams back in the 2000s. There's problems rampant there. Now, could you blame that on Urban Meyer? Part of it, you could. But sometimes people are just going to do things that they're going to do, whether you tell them to do it or not. And you just got to try your best to weed those people out when these things come to light. And that seems to be what happened with Ra Thomas at Georgia. Yeah, and, I mean, look, you said it. This isn't if this had been his first incident, you probably still get kicked off the team. Sure. But, I mean, a year and a half ago, January 2023, he's charged with basically imprisonment of, I guess it was his girlfriend in a dorm room, wouldn't let her leave. Right. She had marks on her arms. I think those charges were eventually dismissed, but I mean, there was clear evidence there. And so at some point, like I said, you just have to make the decision with a guy, look, you're not learning here. You need to go try this somewhere else because I can't help you. Right. So he has been dismissed from the team, again, according to Kirby Smart, a little bit earlier on today when he was meeting with the media. Coming up tonight, we've got the return of NFL football. It is the Hall of Fame game between the Bears and the Texans. And look, this is a game that we talked about yesterday. Oh, yeah. You'll be interested in it for maybe half a quarter, maybe a full quarter, just because it's football back on TV, and we're just so starved for football that matters to some degree. We will all tune in on ESPN tonight at 8 o'clock and give it a watch. But this begins an interesting preseason in the NFL with some things that they're going to be experimenting with, one of which is what's known as the Hawkeye system, which is going to be a new, more advanced way of tracking the ball, tracking the first down marker, and all these kind of things. That's not going to go into effect full go for the regular season until at earliest 2025, but these next couple of weeks of the preseason, they're going to be testing it out. Yeah, and I absolutely love that. I mean, any use of technology that makes the game more fair, right? I do have questions about how long this is going to take. Like anything that takes makes the game longer, right? Like I'm definitely not in favor of, but it's the NFL, so I assume that they're going to have a very streamlined way of doing this. And like I said, if you can use technology to make the game more fair, why not? So, according to ESPN, the Hawkeye tracking service for line to gain measurements adds cameras to the stadium to track players, officials on the ball. The optimal tracking system notifies officials instantly if a first down was gained after the ball is spotted by hand. So, again, this isn't necessarily spotting it. This isn't necessarily for the spot of the ball. It's more for lines to gain and first downs and stuff like that. This will continue to evolve as they mess with it a little bit more. But again, you have a preseason. Try these things out as they've done with many other rule changes in the past before being comfortable enough to put it in full go for, again, possibly the 2025 NFL season.
Yeah, and they were very clear on that, right? Like not in 2024, the earliest is 2025 season.
Which is interesting because, and I think we talked about this yesterday too, tonight's the first instance of looking at the new kickoff rules, which are drastically different, going with the XFL style where you have your, defenders and, return or kickoff team, all on one end of the field, your returner lining up behind that. There's this return zone. There's an incentive to increase more kickoffs. That was not chosen to just be put in the preseason. It's going to be full go for the entire year. Like, it's going to be the norm for the NFL now, and I'm very intrigued to see what this looks like and if it does indeed have the desired outcome of leading to more kickoff returns.
Yeah, no, me too. And look, more plays, right? Like, that's what you want to see if you're a fan. Like, you don't want to see a bunch of fair catches anymore. Like, they tried that for a second, right? Like, no one liked it. They want to see guys hitting each other. That's why we watch football. So if you can add plays where guys are hitting each other, if you can add positive yardage, like, people will tune in more, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of those things, and I thought, when I forget one of the VPs of competition for the NFL said this in the lead up to the Super Bowl, that, the kickoff's a dead ceremonial play. Yeah. And for them to be that bluntly honest about it, I think spoke volumes to where that play is, because I get it. Player safety, concussions, all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Kickoffs are the most violent play because you got guys running full speed at each other on the football field, from yards and yards away. But there had to have been another option.
Yes.
And I did not think they would ever go the route of taking it from another lesser football league.
From the XFL.
But they surprised me because in the little bit of the XFL that I watched, I saw that. I'm like, this could work.
Yeah.
Like, this is a way to make kickoff safer, encourages the run backs, and just adds that exciting play back to the game. You can still have kickoff return touchdowns, the whole 9 yards, adds another layer to the game that had been taken away with the implementation of the kickoff rules in the past decade or so. So I'm excited to see it. Look, it's going to be a work in progress. Special teams coordinators going to find their ways to circumvent this and make it work in their advantage. But I'm excited to see this play out for the first time tonight.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too. Like, if you're a special teams coordinator, like, you almost feel like half of your job was taken away the last couple of years, because it's like, I don't need to plan for kickoff returns or a kickoff defense. Like, sure. There's we don't have to do that. Like, kick the ball in the end zone and we're done. So yeah, to me, like, it makes a whole lot more sense. The NFL had to do something like this, and hey, if it came from the XFL, so what? Like, that is kind of the beauty of Roger Goodell. If, there's not a whole lot to love about him, but sure. I will say that if there is a good idea, he will try to implement it.
There's going to be a little bit of a different look when it comes to the NFL broadcast this year. This per Kathy Yancey, the NFL's Vice President of Broadcasting Rights, Policies, and Compliance. She tells Pro Football Focus this year we have a new policy going into effect where all the clubs are going to have to make a head coach available live for an interview during each game. Each team has to provide a head coach, one in the first half, one in the second half, and that's for all teams, and it's available for all of our TV partners. So typically, as you're going to the locker room at halftime, it's the Steelers and the Patriots. They'll grab Mike Tomlin. Hey, Mike Tomlin, what happened in the first half there? What's your plan going to the halftime? He'll give him, if he wants to, 30-second answer. They go off in the halftime, and then it's the halftime show. But now it's being required, where it was up to the coach themselves. They wanted to talk, and Bill Belichick would famously just say, I don't want to talk to you, and then go to the locker room. But now it's required. And here's my thing. I get wanting to be more inside what's going on with the game. What's a coach really going to tell us?
Nothing.
At halftime, coming out of the half, at the end of a quarter, that's really riveting enough to make this a requirement?
Nothing. And I challenge the next era of producers, right, to just think outside the box, for the love of everything holy. Like, yeah, the interviews, like, it's something that broadcasts have always done, but it's not something that broadcasts need to always do for the rest of time.
Sure.
I think we're past this point, right? Like, where we need to hear from the head coach. Like, I would like to see some innovation in in broadcasting these football games, right? Like, you don't have to get the head coach because, like you said, they're not going to tell you anything anyway. Can you imagine Bill Belichick having to do this? Like, he would say one word.
Yeah.
He'd say one word, and that's it. Like, and you probably couldn't even make out what that word is. He'd probably just like grumble.
And coaches go through entire press conferences not telling us anything.
Right.
So why is, I don't know, Michelle Tafoya suddenly going to get the breaking scoop before halftime on Sunday Night Football? She's not. That's just not what coach is going to do. Now, if you want to go this route of having these interviews, why not do it with a player? I think a player is going to be more 100%. Adept to give you something interesting. Maybe it's not in depth of what's on their mind. Maybe they say something, though. Like, man, they're not calling this the right way, or he said this on the other side. To give you something to play off of going into that second half. I feel like that would be a lot more valuable than the head coach telling you a whole 30 seconds of word salad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, because players are a lot more emotional in these games. They're the ones having to play the game. They're the ones getting hit, right?
Sure,
so, the probability of you getting good sound, right, is probably a lot higher than, from a head coach who has gone through extensive media training anyway.
What is more memorable? What Richard Sherman said after that NFC Championship game about Michael Crabtree, or literally anything a coach has ever said in a pre or post game interview?
Right. Yeah, 100%.
There you go.
Yeah.
There's your take. Whatever player is the story of the first half, interview him on the way to the locker room, 30 seconds a minute, whatever it is. There's your story going into half. Interview somebody coming out of the locker room on the other side, the opposing point of view. I don't know. Give me something there. Like, there's a lot of ways you can go with this.
Yeah, and again, right, like, we don't have to keep doing the same things over and over and over again because they've worked in the past.
Right.
Like, in my opinion, like, now it's so boring to listen to these guys because they're all media trained. You just don't get. Like, we were talking about this yesterday, the beauty of Steve Spurrier, right? Just, like, literally saying whatever the heck was on his mind. Mm-hmm. You don't get that really in the NFL these days. Like, it's not super prevalent. Dan Campbell, maybe. But, a lot of these guys, it's just like, let me get to the locker room and talk to my dudes.
Right, absolutely. If anything, you're holding them up from going and yelling at their team for 5 minutes or whatever it may be. A reminder, the greatest moments in Gamecock sports since the year 2000 live on our Twitter page. It's your final day of the initial voting today, and then we'll take the 4 winners next week in another poll and announce the official winner coming up on August the 12th, sponsored by our friends at Columbia Craft, 520 Green Street, down in the Vista. Come back and continue on. What's trending at 2? A trophy returned to its rightful home yesterday. With that coming up next, it's Halftime Show. Tyler Head, Mike Gillespie here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Mike Gillespie along with you on this Thursday here on The Game. Continuing on with what's trending at 2. Yesterday, tweeted out by Luca Evans, who covers SoCal sports for the LA Times, or formerly of the LA Times, now the OC Register. Reggie Bush's Heisman has made its way back into the Trojans football facility after we had to pretend for like 12 years that he didn't actually win the Heisman. And like, look, here's the thing. I get it. At the time when he was playing, the rules that he broke were against the NCAA guidelines. And yes, it does look silly in retrospect compared to today's NIL rules.
Sure.
I get the fact he broke the rules and what they were trying to accomplish in taking it away. But I feel the same way about taking down banners of winning seasons and national championships. I saw it with my eyes. I saw him run over everyone.
Yes.
I saw him hold up the trophy in New York. Why do we have to pretend it didn't happen?
One of the greatest running backs of all time.
1,000%.
I mean, when he had the ball, there was no one who was going to stop him. And there are very few running backs I've watched. C.J. Spiller at Clemson, one of those guys too. But yeah, like we change as a society, it's okay to change your views, right? Like it happens over time. We as an American society have changed our views on a lot of things, right? Like marijuana usage, gay marriage, for instance, right? Like these things do change over time. Maybe you specifically listening haven't, and that's fine too. But I do think that as a society, we kind of progress with the times. And look, a lot of things in college football have changed in college athletics. Now you've got players who get paid. They should have been paid back in 2005. They should have been paid 40 years ago. That wasn't the landscape. So, yeah, this was totally the right move. I would like to meet anybody who doesn't think it is the right move.
Sure.
I mean, honestly, man, the all of the lawsuits, too, that are going to come from all of this, like, that's the next phase, right?
Sure.
Like, getting all of the wins back, yada, yada, yada. I would love to have gone to law school just so I can represent some of these people because they're going to be on the clock.
Oh, the billable hours, as we talked about yesterday. That's the real winner in all this.
Yeah.
Because this continue to go. Did some number crunching real quick here. His 2005 Heisman season, 2,890 all-purpose yards between rushing yards, receiving yards, kick and punt return yards, 16 touchdowns on the ground, 2 through the air, and 1 punt return touchdown. I think that was the one against San Jose State where he just zigzagged
across the entire
State. I think it was Fresno State. Across the entire field. And it looked like a video game, right? Like it wasn't even fair. Like he was on a different dimension playing when he was at Southern Cal, a part of those really great mid-2000s Southern Cal teams coached by Pete Carroll, which, again, we still can't officially recognize some of their accomplishments in hindsight, which is really dumb. But the taking away of his Heisman Trophy, again, I get he broke the rules of the time, but it was just silly that we had to just pretend, especially Southern Cal, where they couldn't acknowledge that he played for their program. That was the dumbest thing.
Right. They had to distance themselves from Reggie Bush for, 20 years?
Meanwhile, they could still honor O.J. Simpson. I mean, come on now.
I know. It's insane. Like, they didn't take away, did they take away O.J.'s? They did not, right?
Nothing of O.J.'s college career was ever taken away. I'm not saying that it should, but I'm just saying in retrospect to what we believe O.J. Simpson did outside of football and what Reggie Bush did within the football realm, it's crazy that Southern Cal could say, we'll hang his jersey up in the LA Coliseum, but we can't acknowledge the fact that Reggie Bush ever existed here.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Reggie Bush was the first to give his Heisman Trophy back, correct?
Yeah, so
I believe in the Heisman Trust history.
It was kind of it was trending in that direction.
Yeah.
He voluntarily gave it up, but they were going to come take it from him,
away.
Essentially. So he kind of was like, I'm going to get ahead of it.
Sure.
Here you go. Let's avoid the media showdown here. Yeah. Here's my trophy.
By the way, speaking of, did you see this? O.J. Simpson's Heisman is going to be auctioned off with all of those proceeds and memorabilia from his playing days going to Ron Goldman's family.
I did not know this.
Yeah, so that came out yesterday, but I couldn't remember if his Heisman was taken away during that time and then maybe given back. But Reggie Bush, the first and the first one of that time. And, like I said, man, we live in this age now where we should be okay with change, right? Yeah. And embrace it. Kids are getting paid, and that's fine. Like Reggie Bush and his family accepted payments. At the only issue that you can really bring up, I guess, is was it an unfair advantage at the time, right? So for all of the Puritans out there, did they gain an advantage, sure, right, by being able to pay Reggie Bush and then other programs following the rules?
And here's my thing. We know Southern Cal is not the only program doing this. Everybody worth their salt in college football up until NIL was doing something nefarious under the table to try and gain an advantage, because if you didn't, you weren't going to get anybody, and you're going to lose more games than you were going to win. So they just got caught, as many other programs did. Tennessee, the list goes on and on of programs that got caught red-handed doing these kind of things. But that being said, what benefited Reggie Bush did not make him a better football player. He was just at a great team, and he thrived on the field. If this was like a PED thing, that's a different story, because what you're doing that's illegal directly affects your performance on the field.
Unless everybody else is doing PEDs.
Unless everybody else is doing PEDs, which we can talk about baseball in the 90s on a different day. Yeah. But if you're doing something to physically change yourself, that's a different conversation than accepting improper benefits off the field. Mm-hmm. You're still a great player. You still won the Heisman Trophy based on what you did on the field. Yeah,
and like I said, there are few running backs in college football history that just stand out above the rest. And Reggie Bush is certainly in that category of just a freak athlete, could not be taken down, put him in on any play, just a monster on special teams too. I was really fortunate to watch a couple guys in person that I would put in that same category. CJ Spiller, Percy Harvin come to mind too. ESPN, by the way, put out this ridiculous list of like the top 100 college football players since 2000, and Percy Harvin was not on that list.
And you brought up a list to me a little bit earlier. Their top, I think, 100 quarterbacks as well.
Yeah.
And similar to that list of top 25 players since 2000, Baker Mayfield's above Cam Newton.
I wanted to walk into the ocean.
It's like, well, that's just reading Wikipedia. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you watched Cam Newton play, and Baker Mayfield was a great player.
Yeah.
I enjoyed watching Baker Mayfield play. He's not Cam Newton.
No.
Nobody was.
No, not at all. I mean, don't get me wrong. Baker could be magical with the football.
Sure.
But he was not consistently the freak athlete that Cam Newton was. And he just, he was just physically a lot different too. And I would take Cam Newton 100 times out of 100 over Baker Mayfield.
And Cam Newton put an entire offense on his back. If there was anybody else playing quarterback for that Auburn 2010 team, they probably go 7-5.
Gene Chizik does not have a national title to his name.
No, not at all. And you saw as soon as Cam Newton left, as soon as Nick Fairley left, they went back to being average after that. You know what I mean? Like he was that team.
People often ask me, like, what is your number one, defining moment in college football history, right? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes I'll say, you can say Nick Saban. Like, what if Nick Saban didn't go to Alabama, right? Like, what if they hired Rich Rodriguez, right?
Yep.
I also say, what if Cam Newton didn't get kicked out of Florida? Like, I think that whole that decade of Florida football would have been completely different under Urban Meyer.
Right.
I don't think Ohio State, wins another national title because Urban doesn't go there. It just changes so many different things. I don't think Nick Saban is as successful at Alabama.
Sure.
He doesn't have the same legacy. I think so many things change.
Sure. Absolutely. We'll come back. It is August 1st. That means it's football season right around the corner. It also means it's the greatest day in the history of the world. We'll hit that coming up next. It is the Halftime Show. He's Mike Gillespie. I'm Tyler Head, along with you on your Thursday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head, Michael Espy along with you. On your Thursday, it is indeed time for the greatest day in the history of the world, brought to you by our friends at 1-800-GOT-JUNK. This day in 1976, reigning F1 world champion Niki Lauda suffers a near-fatal crash, suffered a lot of burns in the German Grand Prix at Nürburgring in Germany. Did you ever see the movie Rush? Came out about 10 or so years ago.
Did not.
It's
no.
It's got Chris Hemsworth in it, the guy that plays Thor.
Yeah.
And it's the story of James Hunt and Niki Lauda and their rivalry that involved the crash and everything like that. Very good movie. I mean, I'm a motorsports fan, so I kind of liked it from that standpoint, but tells a really good story too. I'd recommend it to anybody if you had not seen it.
Better than Ford versus Ferrari?
I'm actually not a big fan of Ford versus Ferrari because of the historical inaccuracies within that movie. So they filmed when they were doing the 24 Hours of Daytona, the Rolex 24. That was filmed at Auto Club Speedway in California. Which I get it for logistical purposes.
For sure.
But I can't watch the movie and not be bothered by the fact that they're not actually at Daytona filming that scene, pretending like it is.
They absolutely, and they could have done that.
They could have. I don't know how much more it would have cost, or green screens, I don't know, something like that.
Right.
But that always bothers me about that movie.
Wasn't Talladega Nights shot, half of those half of that movie was shot at famous racetracks. They did it at Talladega.
They actually shot a lot of it at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Yeah. And the funny thing is I can watch Talladega Nights and tell you exactly what track every shot takes place at.
That's funny.
Because they alternate between Charlotte, Rockingham, and Talladega.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire movie.
Right.
And some scenes it goes from one track to the other, and that bothers me a little bit too. I'm not here to divulge on that all day, but there's plenty of inaccuracies in that movie, though it's a comedy movie, so I kind of let it pass. But Ford versus Ferrari did bug me a little bit with some of those things that should have been a little bit easier to nail down, in my opinion. 1982 Baseball Hall of Fame inducts Hank Aaron, Frank Robinson, Travis Jackson, and Happy Chandler in 1982. Hank Aaron, obviously one of the greatest baseball players of all time, Atlanta Braves legend. Obviously, we lost him a couple seasons ago, and I don't know what his voting percentage was, but it should have been pretty darn high to get in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah, no, 100%. That one hit hard. There are celebrities and athletes who pass that, it's that's obviously tragic, but there are some that hit a lot harder than others, and obviously Hank Aaron was one of them. I think you and I have talked about this too. Kobe was another one, for me up there. That was really, really hard to take.
Yeah, and for Hank Aaron, he obviously was older, had some health issues, so that's something that, not that you're anticipating it happening, but when it happens, you understand it because it's something that is just a natural part of people getting older and being sick and all that kind of stuff. The Kobe thing was just completely out of left field, that I'm still kind of shocked by to this day, all these years later, that I can't believe that happened type of thing.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's funny, when we were in Minneapolis a couple years ago for the women's Final Four, getting breakfast that morning of the national championship, sat right next to this guy who is very, very involved in the women's basketball game, but girls basketball. And he apparently was very close to the Bryants. And he said that he was actually supposed to be on that helicopter.
Oh man!
But he runs this organization out in California, and but he decided to drive his daughter to that camp that day instead of going with Kobe in that helicopter. So
that is insane.
Yeah,
I can't even fathom what that must feel like.
For sure.
That is crazy. Let's fast forward to the year 1994. Baltimore Orioles shortstop Cal Ripken Jr. becomes only the second player in Major League Baseball history to appear in 2,000 consecutive games, joining the great Lou Gehrig in a 1-0 win versus the Mets. Obviously, Cal Ripken will go on to set the all-time mark for most consecutive games played that I don't think is going to ever be beaten.
No, not at all. I mean, one of the best of all time. That's cool. What year was that?
1994.
1994. Wow.
Yeah. And then his streak lasted all the way up until he retired in 01, right?
Yeah. Yeah, oh, for sure. And looking here, obviously the two-time Gold Glover, 91, 92, 8-time Silver Slugger. He won it 4 straight times. 83 to 86, 83, 84, 85, 86, yeah. 89, 91, 93, 94. Ridiculous, Ben.
Absolutely insane.
19-time All-Star. Wow.
I wanted to get to this before we wrap up here today. This was yesterday out in Paris.
And the kick behind her, she knows this is her 8th Olympic gold medal.
25 meters left for Ledecky to make more history. Won the gold in Tokyo. Is going to back it up again here in Paris. And the greatest swimming machine we've ever seen rolls on to another gold here in Paris with a new Olympic record.
So Katie Ledecky wins yet another gold medal yesterday out there in Paris. And in dominance, not even the right word for this, she was a country mile ahead of second place. Like she had her feet kicked up. She had a snack. She was watching a movie at the finish line, waiting for everybody else to get there to claim another gold medal. And she set all kinds of records. She's only 27 years old. Like, she is the Michael Phelps of women's swimming. And I mean, she's Katie Ledecky. She actually stands on her own now, in my opinion, not just compared to Michael Phelps, but another record-breaking performance yesterday for Katie Ledecky to add to our already laundry list of accomplishments in Olympic swimming. And the ACC official Twitter account yesterday recognized her with the tweet, Olympic record, Ledecky bringing home the medal, accomplished greatness, hashtags Olympians made here, with the picture of her and the Stanford Cardinal graphic below it. We now can retrospectively say Katie Ledecky's an ACC legend, right?
No. No, absolutely not.
But they're trying to.
I mean, they're
trying to.
We can try a lot of things. That doesn't mean that that it's right. Like the ACC is just what an awful conference. I mean, honestly, just like grasping at anything that they can get. And you have to know that, like, when you're putting that out as a social media person, you're like, this is ridiculous. Well, like, someone needs to stop my Twitter fingers right now.
I think it was Wes or Jack that brought it up this morning. It's like, this is for engagement because you're getting a lot of people telling you you're stupid. Why would you tweet this? So at the end of the year, when you're like, hey, here's our engagement numbers, we got a big spike on July the 31st. Like, it's because of this.
It's I mean, as I was telling you, like, Florida has more of a claim to Katie Ledecky because she trains in Gainesville with Florida's head coach Anthony Nesty, who's Team USA's swimming and diving coach. Like, well, I mean, like, Florida has more of a claim to Katie Ledecky than, like, the ACC does. It's so stupid.
I like thinking about this, though. Retroactively, who can we now assign to new conferences? How about ACC legend Aaron Rodgers from his time at Cal?
Oh, yeah. Good call.
Heisman Trophy winner in the Big Ten, Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, Marcus Mariota. Yeah, for sure. Oh, my God. Like, putting me on the spot here. Let's see. Aaron Rodgers is a good one. That's the go-to for sure.
SEC legend Vince Young.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we go all day for sure. Adrian Peterson. Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. I mean,
is Adrian Peterson one of the best running backs in SEC history?
I would have to think so.
It's debatable.
Yes.
Debatable.
I mean, his off-the-field stuff.
Yeah, well, that's a different story.
Not as great. But yeah, I mean, we'll have to get a list together. Like, who are the new ACC legends? And honestly, can they do that?
I have no idea.
Can they have a ceremony? Like, is this the next step where we'll see Aaron Rodgers on stage being a part of an ACC Legends class?
Like, if there was some kind of event for, like, SEC Heisman Trophy winners,
right?
Do they have to invite Baker Mayfield? You know what I mean? Like, does that count?
I don't know.
Probably not, but it'd be fun if it did.
I don't know, dude. Like, wouldn't it though?
Which I guess if you're gonna tweet this, it's fair. It's fair game.
That's what I'm saying. It's opening the whole.
And here's the funny thing too, because we know Cal and Stanford are terrible at football.
Right.
They're not contributing anything much on the football field, but Olympic sports, especially Stanford, they are in all that. So yeah, if I'm the ACC, I'm laying claim to as many of them as I can, saying they're in our conference now.
No, for sure. And I guess I should know this by the medal count, but I assume that they're taking credit for all of Stanford's Olympians, correct?
I would assume so. I need to.
I'm sure.
I need to skim the way through. Which, by the way, Twitter notes came to the rescue, and they said Ledecky graduated in 2021. Stanford was just still in the Pac-12 at that point in time.
Right.
Let's see here. Yeah, I mean they're they're retweeting some of the Stanford tweets, which isn't quite the same as making your own graphic.
Sure.
But they've made a few for Ledecky so far. But, it's just funny to think about in hindsight that now we have to assign these legends to new conferences.
Yeah, and I do. That is a very good question, though. I actually want to bring in somebody who knows what they're talking about this, because like somebody with the ACC and actually ask them that pointed question.
Nope.
Can you can you add an ACC legend that wasn't in your conference at the time?
They have another one here in Tori Husk. Now I don't know if she's still currently swimming for Stanford or not, so maybe that one's a little bit different. But still, she has not competed in the ACC up to this point, if she still is. She's 22. I assume she's still maybe at Stanford. But still, it's just funny to look at.
Yeah, gotta love, ACC great John Elway, too. Yeah.
I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah.
ACC great.
Ridiculous.
Oh, man. Yeah,
Andrew Luck, by the way.
We could be here all day.
Yeah.
We'll come back, hit our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, and get out of here. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Michael Espy with you on your Thursday on the game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head, Michael Lesby along with you. For a couple more minutes here, we'll hand things over to Jay and Elijah in just a moment. Coach Beamer's presser coming up at the top of the hour as we get set for the start of fall camp coming up tomorrow. It is time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. And as anticipated, I knew a lot of people were going to come through clutch with the conversation of who we can assign to the new conferences in retrospect and looking back on history. I got a few here. Okay. Rob, greatest golfer in ACC history, Tiger Woods.
That's a good one. I like that.
Nameless texter, the Boz, now a part of the SEC.
Okay.
Let's see here. Vince Young, we mentioned that a moment ago.
Yep.
Another one for Tiger Woods. Michael weighs in with Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush are now Big Ten legends.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah, the list could go on and on.
Oh,
here.
I mean, it's endless at this point. You and I were talking off air about this just a couple minutes ago. Like, this isn't for show. Like, I am actually wondering if this is going to become a thing where they will have these ceremonies. And, like, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, seriously, like, let's be real. Like, Tiger Woods accepting, an ACC Legends trophy. Like, he would. I don't think he would show up. There's no way.
I don't think he would respond. I don't think he would even deny the invite.
No.
I think it would go into the trash.
Probably.
Does he know what the ACC is? Is he so locked in on golf that he's like, what is the ACC?
No, he lives in Florida. He knows what the ACC is.
I guess so.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's not showing up.
He's a sports fan.
We're gonna honor now. And Tiger Woods is such a special circumstance because if you can work him into something, you're absolutely going to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if he went out there and won the Masters again next year, which I don't think is going to happen, but you never know, then heck yeah, in the ACC,
Sure. Yeah.
Stanford great, ACC legend, Tiger Woods,
100%.
Masters winner.
I mean, like, they've set the precedent, right? Like, they can do this from here on out, I guess, unless someone stops them.
I mean,
someone's got to stop this.
And how far does it go? I don't know. Because again, we could be here all day just naming. Because I'm thinking off the top of my head, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, we had over 10 schools change conferences.
Yes.
Eric Dickerson, ACC legend from SMU. Like
Scotty Scheffler.
Exactly.
SEC legend now.
Exactly. Like, we could be here all day with this because there's so many options that just sound ridiculous.
I hate it. I hate it so much. Like, this can't be a thing. Someone has to shut it down.
And it's one of those things, as time goes on and we move further and further away from when all this realignment happened, some of these things are going to be misremembered as, that person was in the SEC. That person was 100%. In the Big Ten. And I wasn't alive at this point in time. But I have to stop and remind myself, George Rogers did not compete in the ACC.
Correct.
Or SEC. He was the ACC legend.
Right.
Because that's the conference that South Carolina was in. But the farther you get away from it, you just think, like the SEC back in the 80s, you had Herschel Walker, Bo Jackson, George Rogers. No, George Rogers was not in the SEC.
Yes. Like, our children will be like, of course, Aaron Rodgers played in the ACC, like, no, what are you talking about?
Those great games of Cal going down to Doak Campbell Stadium,
no,
and
absolutely,
taking on Bobby Bowden's Florida State team. Who could forget?
Christian McCaffrey hung 600 at Memorial Field in Clemson. Yeah.
If Christian McCaffrey plays in the ACC, does he win the Heisman? Go back to our conversation from yesterday, because he's playing more games on the East Coast.
Sure.
3:30 and 7 o'clock.
That is true.
Instead of
there is
10 o'clock on the West Coast.
There is an East Coast bias. I'll say it as a Heisman Trophy voter.
I mean, it's not impossible.
Yeah.
Did you vote for Christian McCaffrey, by the way?
That was before my time.
That was before your time. Okay.
Yeah.
You could have said that you did.
I probably would have,
because he had my vote. 1,000%.
Yeah. He was the best college football player that year.
Best all. See, that's the thing to me. The Heisman Trophy is the best all-around player, and I get it. Derrick Henry was eating people for breakfast at Alabama. But he wasn't doing kickoff returns, punt returns. He wasn't as active in the pass game. McCaffrey did it all, which is why he was so fun to watch.
Yeah, and
I just had to stay up late to watch him.
Derrick Henry also had a much better offensive line.
That also helped too. And really, since McCaffrey left, Stanford's been nothing.
Yeah, nothing, for sure.
Because they went from Andrew Luck to McCaffrey, not too far apart from each other. And I bet people out there in Palo Alto that cared were like, oh, my God. This is the greatest thing ever. We're going to Rose Bowl. This is fantastic. And now, I mean, I don't even think half the people there know there's a football game on a Saturday.
It's crazy to think, too, like, does Christian McCaffrey spend his entire career at Stanford these days? No, not a chance.
No chance at all.
Not
he would have been getting.
He would be going to Georgia.
Oh, 1,000%. He would have got.
Or Oregon.
We talk about, like, in retrospect of what Reggie Bush could have made in NIL. McCaffrey.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like at Texas, they would have been throwing bags of money. Hey, come play for it. Come get a Lamborghini. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I don't know. Maybe he would have valued the education and stayed at Stanford, but I highly doubt that.
But I mean, he doesn't seem like one of those guys. I've met him a few times. He doesn't seem like one of those guys who like is all about the money, you know, like if that makes sense. Like, and he came from money too. Like,
he did. His dad was a pro, and I think he knew from a very young age he's going to play in the NFL one day. So
for sure.
I don't think he was worried about, feeding his family when he was at Stanford by any means. But yeah, I definitely, that's another good conversation. Guys that definitely never would have stayed at their school if the transfer portal was around in the way that we know it as today. That's a
Well, you got
really
30 more days until kickoff.
That's right. We got plenty of lists to fill in with, and I believe Mike Yuba is actually going to be here with me tomorrow, so maybe we'll dive into that and see what we can come up with.
Good
but
stuff.
Mike, appreciate you filling in
man.
for the couple days this week. Always a pleasure to work with you, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you before the season starts as well.
Sounds good. Thank you.
It's been the halftime show. Coming up next, it is the postgame show. Jay and Elijah. Coach Beamer coming up top of the hour with this presser as well here on The Game.